Sit down. Richard, first of all, I mean, we all know that you're committed to spread knowledge about evolution and the process of life on Earth. But I guess you also have pondered the fundamental question of what is life? How would you answer that question today?
I would prefer not to draw a hard and fast line because as an evolutionist, we're accustomed to everything being gradual and there may be sudden jumps, but I see no particular reason to be compelled to make a definition that before this point it wasn't alive and after this point it was. It's, for me, the key point in the progression of life was the origin of Darwinian natural selection. And that could not happen until there was some equivalent of heredity. It probably wasn't DNA, but it was something that did the same job as DNA, and then DNA probably came along later and usurped that job. But until you have heredity, you cannot have natural selection, and therefore you've got chemistry, but you haven't yet got biology in the Darwinian sense.
I see. But I mean, do you mean that if we, for example, would find extraterrestrial life out in space, it would have to follow the Darwinian procedure as well?
I would stick my neck out and say yes to that. I think that however fanciful our science fiction fantasies might be about exactly what life might be like, it might not even be carbon-based. But my I suppose, daring conjecture would be that, yes, whatever else it is, it's going to be Darwinian life.
Yeah, okay. And today there's a lot of fuss about artificial intelligence and if the machines will become conscious and so on. Would you think that they would be allowed to be considered alive if they reach that kind of consciousness levels?
Well, again, I wouldn't want to be a stickler for any kind of definition of alive. If they, I mean, they're likely to be more than alive in some respects. I mean, likely to be rather frighteningly more than alive. Yes. But it seems to me to be a semantic question which I wouldn't get excited about to argue whether or not they are alive. They are alive in some senses and not in others, and that's good enough for me.
I see. Chemists obviously can contribute to biology quite a lot, but physicists, do you think they can contribute, like Schrödinger tried, in a way?
Well, Crick, as you said in your introduction, was very influenced by Schrödinger. Crick was a physicist, and he moved effortlessly into biology and solved the biggest problem of 20th century biology. So yes, and other physicists have done so. In my own department in Oxford, Robert May is a very successful physicist, moved into biology. Geoffrey West, another physicist who moved into biology and solved a major problem in biology. So yes, I think physicists have a lot to contribute.
We had a lot of discussions these past 3 days about whether there needs to be discovered some new physical laws to be able to explain the evolvement of lives or the arising of life. But you don't really believe that, right?
No, I mean, I'm fully prepared to believe there may be new physical laws to be discovered.
Yeah.
But then maybe having discovered them, they'll then turn out to be important in biology. But I think I'd be surprised if they only apply to biology. I mean, I think you don't need to go to biology in order to get these new physical laws, would be my guess.
Something that surprises me a lot that came up during these days is that evolution obviously has solved the same problem many different times through history and came up with different solutions for the same problem. Can you give some examples?
Oh, this is fascinating. I mean, I love this kind of thing. Convergent evolution, where the same problem calls forth from evolution different solutions or the same solution. So something like the eye, the optical apparatus that forms an image in an eye has evolved dozens of times independently, as we know because we know what the family tree is like, and we can look at the patterns. For example, camera eyes in ourselves, vertebrates. do the same job as camera eyes in cephalopod mollusks, in octopuses. But they have a totally different kind of embryology. The anatomy is subtly different, but it looks very, very superficially the same. Then there are compound eyes, lots of different kinds of compound eyes. There's even a parabolic reflector eye in scallops, in some mollusks. So I think Michael Land has pointed out that there are 9 separate optical principles that have been independently evolved several times in biology. Then if you look at convergent evolution, things like the Australian marsupial fauna, where after the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, there was a wide open space to be filled by mammals. And the mammals independently stepped into the shoes of the dinosaurs. Lots of different shoes, carnivore shoes, herbivore shoes, squirrel shoes, etc., mole shoes. And they independently did it in Australia and in the rest of the world, in South America independently again, and in Africa independently again, and with uncannily similar results. There are flying squirrels in Africa, which are real rodents, and in America there are flying squirrels in Australia, which aren't squirrels at all, they're marsupials, but they look exactly like flying squirrels, and they glide from a high tree to a low tree. There were marsupial dogs, wolves, in Tasmania. They call them Tasmanian tigers just because they have stripes, but they're clearly more like dogs. But they're not dogs, they're marsupials, and they look like dogs and wolves because they do the same job. And there are marsupial rabbits and marsupial moles and all kinds of things.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I also think I have understood that the human eye is not even the smartest solution compared with some of the other solutions.
It's one of the famous examples of bad design in nature. It's very elegantly bad because it's a perfectly good camera with a brilliant lens which can focus and iris diaphragm which can open and shut. But the retina, the bank of photocells which relay the information to the brain, in octopuses it's the right way round. So the photocells are looking at the scene, and the wires from the photocells go backwards to the brain. In us, vertebrates, the photocells point backwards, and the wires from the photocells have to travel over the surface of the retina, and then they dive through a hole in the retina, which is therefore blind. It's called the blind spot.
Not very clever.
Not very clever, but it will. Helmholtz, the great German physiologist and physicist, said that if an engineer had presented him with the vertebrate eye, he would have sent it back.
So octopus has a smarter design, basically.
Yes, that doesn't mean they can see better than us.
Okay.
It doesn't actually matter very much because the nerves that travel over the surface of the retina are transparent.
Yeah.
And so actually it doesn't really matter, except for the blind spot. And so if something really important is on the blind spot, you don't know it's blind. I mean, every one of you in this room is blind in that spot, but you don't know it because the brain fills in the gap.
Yeah.
But if there was something important there, you wouldn't see it.
True, true. No, but I mean, it's good to be reminded of this because a lot of people tend to think that we are the crown of the evolution, so to speak.
That's a big fallacy, must I think, yes.
A very narcissistic idea.
Yeah.
You have to tell the story about this really weird animal who eats its own brain after a while. I mean, what a solution.
Well, quite a lot of marine animals that live on the bottom of the sea or on reefs are sedentary, and they just sit there and they filter feed, so they don't actually need much of a brain because all they do is just sit there and pump water through and filter out organisms. But many of them have larvae which swim about in the surface of the sea, and it's very important that they should do so. They get distributed like that. So when they're larvae, they need a brain.
Yeah.
And the one you're talking about is the larva of a tunicate, a sea squirt. And its larva is interesting because the larva actually looks like a tadpole. And one fairly influential theory suggests that we vertebrates are descended from the larvae of sea squirts. who gave up the adult way of life and reproduced as larvae, which is something that does happen. But when one of these larvae settles down on the bottom and turns itself into a filter-feeding sea squirt, it is said to eat its brain. And Americans like to say that it's like getting tenure.
Yeah, evolution has found some strange solutions. That's for sure. I heard you were interviewed by someone, I think I saw it on YouTube, and the person interviewed said, you try to explain everything with evolution, but I can give you some example of something you can't explain, gravity. And what did you answer?
I don't think I was ever asked that, but there is a Darwinian explanation of gravity, and it goes like this. Everything that goes up has disappeared, and we're left with things that go down.
Exactly. That's a good joke. In March this year, just a few months ago, a new book came out called The Four Horsemen in America. It's released now this week in Sweden with the title Till den fria tankens försvar. And this is a book where you discuss religion with Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens, who unfortunately died a few years after that. This book is a transcription of your dialogue with them, and with some new essays written by you now, and it's also an introduction to the book by the British actor Stephen Fry. First of all, you were at that time labeled the Four Horsemen. That's a quote that's a concept from the Bible, and you were called the New Atheist Movement. First of all, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about the concept New Atheism? Because atheism isn't new, obviously.
No, we didn't invent it, and we didn't own it. We didn't exactly disown it. I mean, I have no objection to it, but it wasn't ours. Sam Harris and Dan Dennett and my books came out first, and we then became known as the Three Musketeers. And then Christopher Hitchens' book came out, so we had to become four. And the Four Horsemen, some journalist coined the phrase. As you say, there's nothing terribly new. I mean, nothing that we said you won't find in Bertrand Russell, say. And that's fine. I mean, what more is there to say? But you have to keep saying it because nobody listens. And I suppose we find different ways of saying it, and it was an interesting occasion. It was the only time the four of us had actually met simultaneously. Yeah. It was organized by my American foundation, the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. It took place in Christopher Hitchens' flat in Washington. We had a very nice dinner then afterwards. And we talked for about 2 hours. In a way, you might say there's not much point in publishing the book because it's available on YouTube. Yeah, the dialogue. On the other hand, I do think that...
But it's in English there.
That's right. I mean,
it's in Swedish.
I do think that foreign translations are probably the optimal position for this book, because people who don't want to listen to it in English can read it in their own language. I'm not quite sure why you bother in Sweden, because I mean, everybody seems to speak English here, and I'm so impressed and actually humbled by and shamed indeed by the monoglottery of the Anglo-Americans. I listened to yes, okay, yes. I mean, we often discuss why this is, and some people say it's because so many people speak English that we needn't bother, but I don't think that's a good enough explanation. I suspect it's because we are never given the opportunity of listening to other languages. I think that in Sweden, your television probably has a lot of English stuff on it, no doubt with subtitles. I wish we had subtitles in Britain. We don't have subtitles. So if a German statesman or a French politician comes on the television, we get 2 seconds of them, and then we get the voice faded out, and we get the voice of an interpreter who doesn't put any expression, is just simply a bland thing. So we don't get the chance. I met the director of the BBC and the director of Channel 4 in the same week as it happened, and I said to both of them, I pointed this out and said, why can't we have subtitles? And they both said, oh, we never thought of that.
But still, I want to talk a little bit more about this book, because the world has changed quite a lot since you had that dialogue. I mean, in America, we have Trump, we have populism, we have nationalism spreading all over the world, we have anti-science sort of attitudes. Do you think that the discussions that you have in this book, the Four Horsemen book, are even more important today than it was a few years ago?
Well, that's possible. I mean, I think these retrograde trends are temporary. I mean, Trump won't be with us for long, and thank goodness. So, I mean, I do think that the general trend of history is in the right direction. With temporary reversals, you've got a kind of sawtooth, occasional blips in the wrong direction. So let's hope it's temporary.
You're an optimist like Steven Pinker in that sense.
Yes, I mean, Steven Pinker and Matt Ridley have both written optimistic books about the long trend of history. America is in particularly an unfortunate phase at the moment because of Trump, and that will go on for quite a long time, because even after he's gone, unfortunately, they have the system of Supreme Court judges who go on till they drop. And so he's appointed two relatively young ones. So this is going to have a very unfortunate long-term effect.
And now we have this new abortion law in Alabama that probably will be tried in the Supreme Court, and they might take away the Roe versus Wade.
That's right. They're hoping it'll go to the Supreme Court, and which could be a very, very unfortunate effect, because Supreme Court judges go on for so long.
Some people say that the most important person in America right now is Ruth Bader Ginsburg's doctor. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is...
she's old.
She's very old, and she's a judge in the Supreme Court, and one of those who actually fight for the rights for women to have abortion. She was actually in Sweden just a week ago, received a prize here at some kind of award.
Did you see him in good health?
I think so. She's a strong woman, but I mean, we'll see about Trump if he gets re-elected. Do you think he will?
Oh, surely not. I mean,
don't be too sure. But still, it's not only America. Look at the Hindu nationalism in India, for example. And in Uganda, Christian churches tried to get death penalty through the parliament for homosexuals. And Brunei has just taken on even stronger Sharia laws.
Yeah, they backed down on that quite recently. There was such an international outcry. People boycotting hotels owned by the Sultan of Brunei.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's something that social media maybe could help with, which is quite interesting. But do you think that? Okay, let me ask you this before we go on to the next subject. Do you think that the discussion about religion and the world and atheism and secular humanism has to be rephrased in any way, depending on how the world develops now?
Probably. I'm not good at this. I mean, many of my colleagues...
No, you've never been doing that, have you?
Not well. I mean, I'm sometimes told that one ought to be more diplomatic and seductive. And so, and I can kind of see the point. When we're arguing about evolution, for example, some of my colleagues, there was a famous case in Pennsylvania where there was a court case, and the evolutionists won. It was a matter of teaching evolution in schools, and the creationists lost. And I met one of the leading lawyers for our side there. And after talking to me for a bit, he said, well, thank goodness we didn't call you as an expert witness. Because I don't have much patience. I'm not one who says, well, you know, you can keep your Jesus and you can keep your religion, and it's perfectly compatible with evolution. It's okay. You can join our big tent. I'm afraid that isn't my way. So tend to annoy some of my colleagues whose job it is to try to get evolution taught in American schools.
Yeah.
And so I tend to keep quiet when that issue is going on.
There are many strategies. One strategy, as you know, in Sweden, the Swedish church strategy, that is to try to please everyone and stop talking about God completely. So that's another strategy again. Okay. A big hand for Richard Dawkins.